English translation 653rd contact Thursday, the 2nd of June 2016, 9:41 hours.
Hello, Ptah, dear friend. I thought you were not coming back until mid-June, as you said. But be welcome and greetings. And also you, Quetzal, be welcome and greetings.
That is correct. But it has happened that I have been able to go away for a few hours, and so I can come here now. I also greet you, dear friend.
I also greet you, my friend, but I am already leaving, for I have already been here for 2 hours, and have looked at everything that you have worked on and fixed throughout the compound since my last visit. I am pleased to see that everything that was desecrated and almost destroyed has been put right again. You have also deforested the forest above the biotope as I recommended, though there is still some work to be done.
Yes, I know. Regarding, you know that he has been severely mentally disturbed since he was a child, constantly hurting himself with razor blades on his body and arms, and equally acting on the trees and bushes in the center area, until you objected to his actions because of that and he became hysterical and went completely crazy and finally also left the Figu. In between, he had good moments, and really also did good and beautiful things that were effectively worthy of recognition. But unfortunately, he never made an effort to get away from his mental disorder. Consequently, he threw to the wind all that was given to him through the teaching. So everything has got worse and worse with him, and is now obviously such that even the best psychiatrist and strong psychotropic drugs cannot help him anymore, for which he is now holding you and me and the Figu responsible. He held you responsible for his hysterical freakout, because you had to object to his really harmful snipping at the trees and bushes, and he implicates me in the same way, because I let him go on for so long until you intervened. But since you advised me early on that I should hold back with him because he could not bear it if something had to be objected to in his work, consequently you would do it if it was necessary, I kept to it. You told me how he immediately reacted negatively and went psychologically crazy when something wrong was pointed out to him, which is what also happened in a hysterical way when you pointed out what was wrong. As for the almost clear cutting of the forest, we could not do this work ourselves because we did not have the necessary machines, the experience or the people, so we had to hire a special logging company, which did not clear everything as neatly as it should have been. For the cleanup, we had planned to do it ourselves together with passive members.
We do not have to discuss the matter of any further, because everything is clear to me. Because I already knew in 1982 that his behavioral patterns as a result of the disorder of his thoughts, feelings and psyche and his non-efforts, non-learning and his unteachability for his own sake, as well as for the sake of changing and remedying his destroyed condition, will not bring success, which is for him in the third millennium will lead to personal failure and departure from Figu.
You did say that at the time, as I recall, whereas you also said that nevertheless, as well as the others who will leave after a long time, should be accepted as core group members.
I explained to you that this was connected with his destiny, as was also the case with the others, which could not be counteracted by a refusal of membership. So, in spite of everything, he, like all the others, had to be given the opportunity to continue learning again, as well as to reflect and to rejoin the mission and become stable in it. This may seem contradictory to you, because the whole thing was predictive, but it is to be said that it did not happen in this form alone, but only to a certain extent, while predictive probability calculations were also made. These, however, left a lot open, such as various possibilities from which changes could result, as well as in the sense that could have used the time to make an effort to look after himself, to learn and to free himself from his mentally, emotionally, and psychologically conditioned disorder. But he has made so little use of the time, as well as of the learning material, that he has fallen deeper and deeper into his pathological and irrational behavior towards himself, and is also carried away in the same way. I have nothing more to say about this, which is why I want to say something again about the forest work, about which I have noticed that no proper work has been done, so you must do the rest yourselves, especially with regard to the various inferior tree and shrub growths that you still have to clear away. Also still conspicuously disturbing are the accumulations of branch woodwork which must be removed and disposed of to ensure orderliness, as is imperative for the center and center grounds.
This is already planned to the extent that it will be done on occasion when we have enough people to do it. There have been objections to this, at least from one side, because the necessary understanding is lacking, precisely that the order and cleanliness of the center grounds is impaired by the unsightly piles of wood. There were objections, such as that the logging company had used a machine to push the piles of wood together, with the soil over the edge of the road, and that because of the soil the whole thing was very tedious and nonsensical if everything still had to be cleared away. Consequently, the piles should be left to rot, which will happen naturally in a few years.
This is thoughtless, nonsensical, and shows a lack of sense of order and cleanliness, disorganization, mental and material disorder, as well as lack of plan, sloppiness, and, as I said, a sense of disorder. It is therefore to be enforced that the necessary work be done, and that the order and cleanliness of the deforested steep slope of the right be established and then maintained.
I am of that opinion just now.
Then the matter is settled and I can go. Goodbye, my friend, and be concerned that what is necessary is done.
Poof, and away he goes. It is always interesting how short-tempered he can be. So, I could ask you a few things now that are on my mind, and also the two things we talked about last time. Or what do you think?
Naturally, if it is that important to you.
Good. Do you know if Anjana and Florina were in my office last Sunday night?
Yes, that's what they told me. They were reading in your many books, but why do you ask?
The two of them obviously felt unsafe once again, because contrary to our agreement, they once again locked the outer door to the office anteroom, which they are not supposed to do. Cuneo should have opened the door to work in the inner vestibule, but he could not get in, so he called me and I had to go into the office from Eva's office and open the outer door, which was locked from the inside. Fortunately, they did not lock this door. They did not lock this door, as was the case once before, and I had to call Florina at that time to beam herself into my office and open the door again from the inside because the key was stuck and so I could not open it from the outside. And because Florina and Anjana were unavailable at the time, it then took several hours until I could get back into the office. There is really no reason to be afraid in my office, because when I leave it, I lock all the doors. Also because I know that the two girls are reading or listening to music CDs now and then in the office.
I am aware of that, and I will talk to the two of them to stop locking the doors, because there is actually no reason because they cannot be disturbed in your workroom because the doors are locked when you go out.
Good, and thanks. Then I want to address this matter here. However, there must be a misunderstanding on the part of about this remark. There must be a misunderstanding on the part of about this remark, because neither you nor I have ever said that he insulted me and called me names. So consequently, in this aforementioned relationship, the statement made was not directed at him, but at others who really insulted me and tried to insult me. The truth is that has always been decent and correct towards me and has also never verbally attacked me, just in contrast to others who rise above themselves and try to justify themselves with lies and slander. What do you think about that? For my part, I think that we must act according to what corresponds to our Figu rules. Consequently, we agree with what asks me. Of the 5 who left, he is also the only one who remains decent, and despite leaving Figu also clearly wants to continue to maintain a link with US core group members in Figu. I find his given account that he wants to form himself in a correct manner, honest, acceptable, and understandable as a justification for his words. The same law must apply to him as to any other human being. And I would also like to say that, in the end, he must walk through his own avenue and look at each individual tree in its own way and in all its details in order to recognize this, that and the other of its values and unvalues, and to decide and make the correct thing out of it. And as the creational natural laws and recommendations dictate to him, at the end of the avenue the way of the cross will be waiting for him, where he will have to decide whether to go back in the avenue and keep his problems, or to the left, to the right, or whether to go straight ahead and actually form himself according to his desire in a correct way.
Your reaction, and everything you have just said, is in accordance with your attitude towards the human beings, your character, and the guidance of your mission. But as far as my opinion on everything is concerned, I cannot help but be of the same opinion and judgment as you are also. According to what says, his words are in accordance with honesty and are meant seriously. This is a very clear reason for keeping the way open for him and also for reaching out to him. What will come out of this in the future, only time will tell, and that is, as you said, when he has to decide, when he comes to the crossroads and will have to decide finally which side to choose.
Thanks. That is probably our correct decision, which I think we can also expect at our June General Assembly. Now to what I would like to know. You promised me during your last visit to our private meeting that you would do some research in your annals, in order to be able to give me more precise information on my questions regarding the fact that you Plejaren have been living in peace for more than 50,000 years. That is to say, without wars and revolutions and terrorism, etc., and also in a truly direct democracy. I am also interested in how it was before with regard to the forms of government and the administrations of your countries, and how did your united world or the community of nations on Era come about? As you know, on Earth we have various state governments up to dictatorships, as well as lower administrations subordinate to the state governments, as is the case, for example, in Switzerland, where the Federal Council, the National Council, and the Council of States form the supreme government, then in the cantonal governments as well as district and municipal administrations and so on. Did you Plejaren have similar conditions in earlier times, or what was it like? And what I have wanted to ask for a long time, since you have recorded all the conversations that you and I have had since the time of your father Svath and up to the present day, I would like to ask whether it is possible for you to pick out the first introductory conversation between Svath and me, and then transmit it to me. And as I told you the other day, I have often been asked how it was and how everything went when the first important conversation between your father Svath and me took place, to which you said that in June you would bring me an extract from your annals or transmit the conversation to me.
I can do that now. Because it is not a secret matter that we are not allowed to mention openly. And so I have picked out what you asked for and can retrieve everything from our annals, which I will also do after I have answered your first questions. I have also worked my way through the annals in this regard and can at least explain everything necessary to you. Unfortunately, not everything in its entirety, because that would lead too far and take too much time.
Thanks. But now I have another question. Whether you Plejaren previously had similar forms of government to those that exist today on Earth?
That was in fact the case, as the ancient records regarding a peaceful global world leadership among several Plejaren folks were not heeded, for which reason insurrections, wars, revolutions, and diverse forms of terrorism occurred. But that resulted from the fact that 5 different folks distantly descended from the Nocodemian lineage had settled on Era, who were rivals to each other, about which, however, I should give a few significant explanations for your information. Of course, I cannot be too detailed with those, but will only discuss the most important information, because the whole history is so extensive that a day-long lecture would be required to discuss it all. Hence, I shall begin. Our folk, from which I myself am distantly descended, bore since time immemorial the designation Nocdemisdarn, which means in the language of our ancestors, in brief, folk of Nocodemion. This folk comprised 11 folks which had their homeworld on a planet called Erana in a star system called Iskura. When the astronomers realized that a destructive change was happening in the star system Istkura, in which our ancestors lived, and that an annihilation of the whole system was imminent, and the destruction was spreading rapidly, through which the home planet Erana was also threatened with destruction, a resettlement possibility in another star system on another planet was sought for all the folks. Such a star system was in fact found after a few years. So all 11 folks, who in total comprised 510 million human beings, were resettled in the new system within 28 years, namely on 2 different planets in 2 different solar systems. The cosmic destruction process of the East Kura star system lasted 214 years before the whole system was entirely wiped out. The resettlement in the new star system, which was about 6 light years across, happened about 26 million years ago, and since then till the present time we have been based in the Plejaren system, which will also remain so. The resettlement occurred into 2 different solar systems on 2 life-bearing able planets in a large star system, that is to say a so-called open, loose star cluster. 3. Already at the beginning of the colonization in the new star system, it was called Plejaren by our Ur ancestors, namely an alteration of the name Plejara after the Ishrish, presiding over the resettlement. Our Ur ancestors chose this star system designation according to an old, passed-down tradition that stated that the first folk that colonized a formerly uninhabited but now habitable planet in a new star system should take for the name of the star system the name of the Ishwish, that is to say Jishwish 5, or of the Ishrish or Jishrish in charge of the action. Borrowing from the home planet Irana, the new home planet was then named, in abbreviated form, Era. This on the one hand. On the other hand, the new planet Era was colonized by the first 6 folks that had been following the teaching of the prophets since time immemorial, and were therefore peaceful, democratic and heedful and following of the creational laws and recommendations. From this lineage descended all the clans of my genealogy, who have undertaken since time immemorial to follow and spread the teaching of the prophets, namely the teaching that had its origin with the universal prophet Nocodemian. The ancient undertaking traced back to then, because as our annals state, the most distant Ur ancestors of my own lineage issue from the universal prophet Nocodemion. The mission on Earth is also in this succession of undertaking, which has lasted up to this day and in which also our early as well as our direct forebears were involved in recent millennia. At first, however, we did not know, in regard to our present undertakings, why it was that my father Svath took you into his tutelage and initiated you into the teaching of the prophets, for it was unknown to us that you are of importance to the Nocodemian mission. First, in the course of the years of our contacts with you, did we become aware, as we were advised of it by the High Council and by ancient records, what importance was to be attributed to your spirit form and what importance it indeed has. What was known to us at that time consisted merely in that we had to concern ourselves with you, which fundamentally and primarily became the task of my father Svath, after him Asket, and after her Simyase, Quetzal, and me, to carry out this duty. But to return to the history of us Plejaren, about which I still have very much to say and to explain. So, the home planet of the emigrants from the star system Idskura had been destroyed by a cosmic catastrophe, for which reason the humankind existing there had to leave and seek out a new home, which they found in the new star system which was known to them and was located more than 4,000 light years away, which after the colonization they named Plejaren, and which contained, in the 6 light-year encompassing system space, about 563 system members. In this Plejaren system, there existed solar systems with planets, among which 2 were capable of bearing human and other diverse forms of life. Consequently, these worlds were considered for colonization by the settlers. So the first 6 folks, to which my Ur ancestors also belonged, who formed a knowledgely and teaching successive community, colonized the planet that was called Era. The other 5 folks were entitled a planet in a neighboring solar system that was given the name Eris. This planet, too, was naturally a planet capable of bearing life for human beings and for other life forms, so the settlers remained there from then on. Everything went well for all the following millions of years, as the population of all folks was maintained, in accordance with the prescribed law, at a size of a little more than 500 million in total, as had been laid down in law since time immemorial in order that no overpopulation could occur, and so that no unsolvable problems and no destructions to nature or to the planet be elicited. But then it came to pass a little less than 112,300 years BC by terrestrial Emmanuel-based reckoning, that a might-obsessed Ishwish and an Ishrish from two of the folks joined forces in an Ausartung, corresponding wise, who united their two folks and brought about a Gewalt, rule Twaits, by means of minions drilled in acts of Gewalt, and were able to enforce this against all resistance. The conjoined populations were terrorized and tormented, as all the ancient traditional laws, recommendations, regulations, and manners were replaced by Ausartung corresponding new decrees, and the two might-obsessed ones were placed in the position of a higher might. The process lasted more than 200 years and disabled the population in regard to their own powers of decision-making, as well as in their intellect and rationality. And this occurred in a form whereby the two might possessors were obligatorily treated as absolute dictators, which quickly led to compulsory submissiveness and servitude of the population, as well as ultimately to the delusional belief that the dictators be in possession of the almightiness and the creation power. The inevitable consequence thereof led quickly and inevitably to worship of the dictators, and so to a state of belief of a religious form, because the human beings had submissively distanced themselves far from the reality through the Gewalt rulership and imagined themselves, contrary to intellect and rationality, to be free, protected, and independent, so long as they humbly, prayingly, and undissentingly submitted to the Gewalt rulership. Hence, in a religious wise, real flesh and blood might-obsessed human beings were worshipped as creational omnipotences, unlike the imaginary, unreal deities, as the wonder-working creator beings in our fairy tale forms were called. In doing so, they unlearned that they owed their entire existence ultimately to their own achievement and not to the dictators. Ultimately, the human beings came to believe, in their centuries-long Gewalt and compulsionally suggestively indoctrinated delusion, that the Gewalt rulers and their later successors of the same kind had in primeval times originally created them as human beings and had also created the air to breathe, the water to drink, and even the sun, all the heavenly bodies, the planets, and all life forms. For all the human beings, the Gewalt and coercion-based delusional belief became an axiomatic, that is to say, incontrovertible, unquestionable fact, so that all these things should have been provided to them since time immemorial by the Gewalt rulers, who they believed to be creationally superior to them, and that they were obliged to worship these dictators servilely, thank them for their benevolence, and in their presence to lower the gaze and cover the head. Thereby, the belief came to be, and so the fact of religion, that, in having been created by the Gewalt rulers, that is to say, dictators, the human beings have a connection back to these, thus exactly what is said by the term religion, binding back religar. This term relates, in the form of an irrational teaching, to the situation of the religion believers having supposedly relinquished a connection to their dictators, that is to say, creators, namely the belonging together with them, wherefrom there then be the obligation for them, the human beings, that is to say, religion believers, to reconnect with them. It bears saying furthermore that through the combination of these two folks and the delusional belief in the Gewalt rulers, that is to say, dictators, as well as through their might machinations and acts of Gewalt, also unpeace arose with the other three folks. From this circumstance there resulted terrible and destructive wars between all the folks, and 75,140 years ago triggered a planetary catastrophe, which ultimately spread over the whole planet eras and took on global and devastating proportions, namely in that the planet and its atmosphere began to die off and slowly but constantly made all life impossible. Hence, A mass exodus of the hostility-embroiled and embattled folks took place, and the nearest solution for them was to approach the planet Era as their nearest place of refuge, and there to set down their craft with Gavalt. The anciently indigenous six folks on Era additionally wanted to become involved in no belligerent actions, so they, albeit reluctantly, permitted the Gavalt and invasionly immigration of the refugees and, naturally, refrained from their hostile entanglements, but did, however, endeavor in the name of the folk through the spirit leadership to put an end, through peace efforts, to the repeatedly igniting Gavalt and war actions among the Gavaltly immigrated folks, which, however, was completely without success. The population count of the Gavalt-doing immigrants consisted of 382 million human beings, thus all of those who had survived the war actions on Eras. Thus, the population count on Era rose to about 900 million, which naturally led to many problems and difficulties, which the anciently settled folks had to deal with, who naturally, in accordance with their laws, recommendations, rules, and regulations, etc., were helpful to the folks of their neighbor system. They, however, did not conform to the laws and recommendations, etc., of the anciently indigenous folks, but continued their feuds and wars amongst themselves and against each other. And this continued for following centuries, yet the anciently indigenous six folks abstained and did not interfere, which was respected by the intruders. This respect resulted from the fact that they knew full well that the anciently indigenous inhabitants of Era were ready, in the event of an attack upon them, to defend themselves, and moreover were greatly superior to the would-be attackers in every respect. For that matter, it further bears saying, of the 11 folks of that time, thus only 6 of them were peaceful, democratic, and, in regard to their way of life, aligned with the teaching of the prophet, which already since very early times had determined in every respect within these folks their life, their deeds, actions, and behaviors, and comprehensively likewise everything else about them. In the course of time, these 6 folks formed themselves on our planet Era together into a single folk, and this folk vested supreme authority in a 9-person spirit leadership, which had the office of conducting the affairs of the folk according to the democratically charactered folk will, which has unfailingly remained the case to this day, and also will remain so indefinitely. The other 5 folks practiced, as I previously explained, religious and higher human power-oriented belief forms, so for the sake of Gavalt rulers, that is to say dictators, whom they worshipped in a religious wise as their creators, which for our great folk was naturally irreconcilable with the reality, and thus also did not correspond to the real truth. All of these 5 diverse higher power-believing folks were mutually unpeaceful and even hostile to one another, as similarly the populations were peaceless and loveless as well as aggressive amongst themselves. Hence, also after their exodus from the unlivable home planet Eris, they continued, as before, repeatedly to carry out hostile actions against each other and disturb the peace on Era, until ultimately, 74,200 years ago, a global war took place in all those regions inhabited by the war-obsessed folks who were engaged in their mutual hostility. Toward out great folk, however, they respected our efforts for peace and so kept at rest toward us and abstained from offensive actions against us. Yet this was also no doubt ensured by our much higher technology in regard to defensive actions, for ours were very superior to theirs. Insurrections, wars, revolutions, and terrorism were inevitable among these folks of beliefly dictators because of the systems of government in operation over them, which were operated by the might-obsessed rulers. These ruled the folks in a gruesome wise, similar to how has been done on Earth since time immemorial, and as continues to be done, for this has been perpetuated into the present time. The whole of the undemocratic systems were on the one hand practiced in the form of monarchies, dictatorships, and other Gavalt rulerships, as well as, however, through similar forms as are called republics, etc., in the terrestrial sense. Not until a final 7-year, extremely terrible and devastating global war, about 74,200 years ago, by the mutually hostile folks that had fled from eras to era, did it come about at last? After more than half of the human population of these hostility-embroiled folks was reduced through the war actions, that the Erasans' minds changed for the better. So, using many ideas, a political reformation and transformation process was pursued, which however took about 14,000 years and brought no success, but was the remaining war folks of eras engaged in rationality-wanting quarrels, were at odds with each other and brought forward some objections and proposals that could not be implemented, so everything came to naught. They frequently imagined themselves to be disadvantaged, wanted special conditions, more might and rights. So time and again the whole matter fell through and the old forms of government were continued and validated. That led again and again to insurrections, actions of war, to revolutions and terrorism. Not until the individual spirit leaders of these quarreling, warlike folks confederated into a spirit leadership and unitarily gave teachings to the war folks, were the Erasans stimulated to concern themselves deeply rationally in the framework of the ancient traditional teaching of the ancient prophet and to learn it comprehensively. But the efforts for that fundamentally came from the spirit leadership of the anciently indigenous folks, who intended to debut a whole planetary leadership, if the warlike folks could assent to it. Yet the teachings giving and teaching lasted a further about 3,000 years, before the teaching was sufficiently accepted by and integrated into the thought world of all the quarreling folks that had fled to Era and had incessantly sowed discord there, that the human beings began to cultivate a better attitude in themselves and toward the relations with the population of their own countries as well as the population of other countries. Nonetheless, time and again there still arose aggressions and Ausartungs in regard to insurrections, acts of war and terrorism, and in general the responsible motives for these were religious and related to the various extant belief communities still believing in the Gavalt rulers and dictators. Eventually there came at last the point in time when, in cooperation with the indigenous spirit leadership, the spirit leadership of the hostile folks had also worked out a new form of state leadership, which was approved by all folks, according to the system of the old teaching of the prophet. Having at last grown weary of the insurrections, wars, revolutions, and terrorism, the countless dead and the destructions, ultimately, of the about 382 million human beings of the Gavalt-employingly immigrated hostile and embattled folks, more than half were killed by the global war, namely more than 217 million, and so there were only 165 million survivors. This ultimately led to the situation that the rest of the hostile folks were actually willing to heed the drawn-up rules and proposals of the spirit leadership and to approve these. That did occur only with great effort, but such that rapid progress was made, and the human beings who had been devotees of the higher powers disengaged themselves from their delusional belief, broke free thereof, and assimilated into the democracy of the indigenous Arans, and also unanimously into the rules and laws of the planetary spirit leaders, who had been appointed by the great folk as the supreme planetary spirit leadership. Yet there was also likewise a spirit leadership responsible for each country, that is to say, state. Thus, for the entire planet and also for all the previously hostile, now however semi-peaceful countries, that is to say, states, the planetary unanimous leadership form of the spirit leadership could be implemented. Consequently, all extant formerly hostile and Gavalt-usingly immigrated folks of all countries were, in the course of the following 5,000 years, further given teachings by the spirit leadership in accordance with the teaching of the prophet and led into a peaceful future. And since, through the Gavaltly migration of the formerly warlike folks from the planet Eris, the population of Era increased by 382 million human beings, of which ultimately only about 165 million remained following their global war, and therefore the prescribed norm of few more than 500 million human beings had been greatly exceeded. Naturally, the population of Era surpassed the established quantity. They were naturally integrated into the whole Aran population, so the prescribed norm of 500 million was exceeded, and this no longer accorded with the standard per the relevant law. So population regulation measures were taken in order to reach the correct population size. So, through the planetary spirit leadership, a guiding and for the Aran total population unanimously valid behavior directive was drawn up regarding a strict birth regulation, and explainingly promulgated to the population of Era in all connected relations and concerns and put to a vote. And as is recorded in our annals, the whole population of Era assented to the directive without a single dissenting vote. So it was implemented, and the goal of reduction of the population to the prescribed standard was achieved through an appropriate yet strict birth control within 311 years of terrestrial time reckoning. From that point on, the size of the Aran humanity remained constant, for, as the immemorially prescribed norm pertaining to progeny has been, owing to intellect and rationality of the Aran population, upheld for the sake of their own and their world's well-being, as well as for that of the nature, fauna, and flora, the planet and its requirements, there are no destructive problems in this regard. Lastly, it is to be said that during the subsequent 5,000 years, that is before the definitive peace could be created, it also happened, and without G-vault or coercion, rather only through the once hostile Erasans ever more following the teaching of the prophet and beginning to think, act and live according to it, that resultingly all of their religious issues became resolved and eventually there existed no more religion believers on Era. That was then the definitive cause for our world being permanently pacified and democratized, and since then no insurrections, wars, no revolutions, and no terrorism have occurred anymore. So on our planet Era, about 52,000 years ago, among all folks unanimously the true democracy, and so also a henceforth lasting peace were created, and with that also an ample freedom for all human beings on Era. Thereby, it came to pass that all ideas and belief forms pertaining to undemocratic forms of government and behaviors, of the earlier ruler and might government forms on the planet Eras, were forbidden by the formerly hostilely delusional believers of Eras themselves among their kind and replaced by new laws and regulations, etc. of the spirit leadership. And these were accepted and approved by the extant remaining total population of Erasans in a democratic wise. So everything was regulated in every respect, and this has upheld up to the present day, and shall also remain so for all the future. The consciousness development of the Aran population, which is to be assessed at between 20 and 30 million years higher than that of the terrestrial human beings, does not enable for us Plejaren any relapses into dark, de-evolutive and inhuman machinations, because the entire Plejaren population has once and for all progressed onto the way of the teaching of the prophets, and shall also, with sureness, tread that way further. It only remains to say that what I am about to explain in regard to terrestrial systems of government is based on our overall Plejaren view, and in no wise applies to those few who are working and functioning in civil government positions, civil offices and civil administrations, who as a minority are doing their job in honor and dignity and in accordance with right. What I am about to say relates only to the bulk of them, that is to say, to all the unrighteous state government employees of the highest offices and to those of all lower offices, positions and administrations, etc., who behave just like the higher-ups, that is the bulk of the unrighteous highest governing ones. Unfortunately, on the planet Earth there are, in all governments, under-governments, offices, administrations and branches of government, and so in all very important key positions, there is a preponderance of human beings who are might-greedy, paranoid psychopaths, who are recognized as such neither by their co-workers nor by the public. The fact here is also that this bulk of unrighteous ones and psychopaths operates behind closed doors and, in their markedly characteristic egoism and their might greed, do everything in a secret wise over and past the will of the folk, and make decisions for the folk to their detriment. Indeed, those in the highest positions of government are very mighty figures, but the bulk of them is lacking in clear intellect and conscious rationality, as well as the necessary modesty and responsibility to the folk. They are all true leviathans with gigantic might, which they misuse without restraint. Not to be included in those criticisms is that minority of righteous ones in governments and civil offices and civil administrations, etc., who unfortunately can effect nothing against the folk-hostile machinations of the self-imperious, might-obsessed ones. Also, those Earth humans who, in the offices and sub-governments and administrations, etc., subordinate to the state governments. And they do this against their civil duty, which entails that they govern according to right and are obliged to be of official service to the folk. All these ones civilly amenable to the folk and fundamentally civil servants of the folk, which they effectively ought to be, yet who do not observe their required duty, tread on the folk as they go as if they were stepping on little ants. They game their might and are, fundamentally, in their civil offices and in their execution of their civil duty, in practice just as incompetent as they are in regard to their observation of responsibility amenable to the folk. The bulk of all of those whom I here accuse as unrighteous ones, yet naturally from whom I exclude all the righteous ones, is caught in a network of contradictory interests, while simultaneously it attempts to conduct its state, government, and office orchestra in order to impose its will on the folk. It is, however, truthfully that the unrighteous governing ones and administrators, etc., are completely incapable of governing the folk as such in righteousness and assisting it dutifully. Wherewith the worst thing about it is that the folk is absolutely moot to them, because they are only hell-bent on their financial and personal might and to accomplish their illogical, folk-down-dumbing, and havoc-wreaking political aspirations. The dominance of these paranoid psychopaths and the unrighteous majority of the government ones on Earth are suffering from such has the result that all around in the governments, civil offices, and civil administrations, the incompetence is virtually facilitated, which ensures that, inevitably, sooner or later the downfall of these systems will come about. That also has ramifications to the private sphere of the terrestrial human being, and indeed particularly for the unrighteous ones, self-imperious ones, and egoists. A modest, conscious, clear, logical and rational as well as humane and all-around responsibly thinking terrestrial human being has a harder time than ever before in the today's modern time in the undemocratic, unfair, catastrophically retrograde, and illiberal government systems of all countries of Earth. The terrestrial human being cannot go his or her own way to self-realization and to his or her socially creative position, nor to his or her good job, in order to do valuable work and teach the truth, because he or she is oppressed both by the paranoid psychopaths in the governments, civil offices, and civil administrations, etc., as well as by those existing among the folk. By the unintelligent and self-appointed enemies, liars and slanderers, as well as by enviers, wiseacres, critics, liars and slanderers addicted to unintellect and irrationality. Every possible and all manner of primitive wrongdoing is done. This is done in order to do damage and in order to oppress, revile, and slander the honest, good, righteous, and worthy human beings, who accomplish progressive, enlightening, and valuable things for the terrestrial humankind and its consciousness evolution in order thereby to imagine themselves big and strong and to be heroes. Not only in the terrestrial governments, civil offices, and civil administrations, but also in the schools, universities, and in politics, as well as in the psychological psychiatric professions and in economics, etc. There prevails in all terrestrial states a deficit system of the unvirtue untalentedness of completely incompetent terrestrial human beings. The terrestrial humankind suffers as a whole on account of the lack of genuinely virtued, talented human beings, who effectively are bearing enough intellect and rationality to be able, in an honorable and worthy as well as humane and fully responsible wise, to lead the terrestrial humankind, while consciously, modestly, correctly and unself-interestedly carrying out and bearing responsibility in conscious ability and concern, with the formation and leading of the fates of the Earth's humankind according to democratic provisions.
That is all very interesting. Sincere thanks for your elaboration.
I was happy to elaborate on that. Then I will now, yes, there it is already, one moment, my friend. Ah, yes, there's the data.
Can you read them to me?
I can, but it will take some time.
That is not a problem.
Good. Then I will first say what my father listed in the annals about the first meeting with you, namely that your first meeting between you was in silence and only by gestures, and that neither you nor he spoke a word to each other. Although you both spent more than an hour in his flying apparatus, and he let you watch Europe from above while flying around at a great height. Listen, however, to what was said between you and my father during the first conversation on the 2nd of June, 1944, exactly 72 years ago, after he had already been teaching you telepathically for 2 years and imparting to you an enormously extensive knowledge in order to prepare you for what he then had to say and explain to you during the first conversation. So now I give you from our annals the conversational replay of the first personal conversation between my father and you, which of course was conducted in your native dialect. Consequently, you have to translate the whole thing into the German language.
Naturally, it is clear. I also have to do that with the conversations we have together in Swiss German, which sometimes leads to word order mistakes, etc. in sentence formation, because I have to keep a certain writing speed when recalling the conversations. By the way, I find it very interesting that you, Quetzal, Florina, and Anjana have learnt Swiss German so quickly and so perfectly that one could think it was your mother tongue.
However, translating into German is not a problem for you, as I know you have a very good command of both languages.
Thanks for your opinion. And about Swiss German, there are various people who call themselves linguists, etc., and claim that it is a dialect of German.
Which is nonsense because Swiss German is a language of its own, as our linguists clearly explain and emphasize, but we have already talked about this in earlier conversations and made this fact clear. But now listen to what I am reading to you from my father's notes of Sunday, the 2nd of June, 1944.
First contact conversation from the 2nd of June, 1944.
Edouard, today the time has come to have our first in-depth conversation together and to confront you with an important decision. First, however, I will tell you my name personally, namely Svarth, as you already know, and I am from another world in a distant star system which we call Plejaren, as our humanity also calls itself. It is my task and duty to take you into my teaching care, if that is also according to your will. Consequently, you must decide for or against it yourself. I also want to say that I am astonished as a result of your behavior, because you are without fear and crime, and also do not ask what will happen to my flying apparatus and to my personality. This is unusual for me, and that is why I am asking you about it.
So, Svat you are, and you come from another world? I'm not really surprised about that. I do feel a bit strange, but in a good way. I am also not afraid because I just observe everything because I am always interested in everything.
You are really amazing, but I knew that since you were born, because since then I have been trying to take care of you. And so that you know what my words mean, I have many things to explain to you, to which I want you to listen carefully, because one way or another, you will determine your life from the moment you decide for or against what I have to explain to you. Already now in our first conversation, which will be mainly with me, I have to explain to you a few things about your life ahead of you and also about what will happen in world history in the future. Of course, I cannot do this in detail and not in the exact order, but only in a cross-section to give you an impression of what will happen and take place in the times to come. And after what I have to say and explain to you for the time being, you must then decide after careful consideration.
What do you want me to choose?
You'll understand if you listen carefully to what I have to say.
Of course, I will decide when I know and understand what you are saying and why I should decide.
You will understand everything, Edward. There is no doubt about that, because you are still a young human being with a logical cultivation of thoughts, with a knowledge, understanding, comprehension, and with the reason of a 35-year-old man, which is why, despite your young age and your still physically progressing growth, you are for me an adult interlocutor in terms of the development of consciousness, and I can also talk and converse with you in this way. You will understand everything very well, and also the whole scope of what I now have to say and explain to you. Therefore, now listen to and be mindful of my word, Edward, for if you accept your task, then in the coming time, until the end of your days, you will teach and train all those human beings of the earthly world who follow your call, voluntarily come to you and begin to orientate their lives according to your words and the teaching of the prophets. You will not have only one disciple in your homeland, but a multitude around you, and many at the same time, also in the whole earth world. As a result, many of those disciples who gather around you directly or through writings around the earth world will simultaneously or gradually have different experiences in the same situations and thus change for the good. Others, however, for reasons of selfishness and out of false inner rebellion, will again go away from the teaching which you teach, and others will also practice treachery against you in the teaching. But before you turn to the task, if you accept it, you will first travel to many countries and earn your bread and butter in them by doing various kinds of work, and not infrequently also in a dangerous way, whereby you will suffer bodily injury and lose your left arm through the drunkenness of a man. You will also, out of necessity, enter into an alliance with a Greek companion for 30 years and found a family with 3 descendants. In order to return to your homeland after your years of wandering and settle down, because only through this bond will you be able to persevere, build up your necessary strength, and carry out your task. Your companion, however, will be aggressive, wicked, and false in her behavior, will repeatedly threaten you dangerously during the time of your alliance, and will lead violence against you in order to then, after the dissolution of your alliance, together with one of your sons, revile you with false accusations and lies all around the earth world. But you will only strengthen yourself further by this. Persevere, do your important work, and fulfill the task. You will have to be connected with your companion for the given time. It will be that you will have to strengthen yourself through her evilness, dangerousness, falsehood, and dishonesty, because the execution of your task will demand forces from you which you will only be able to create by fighting bad degenerations with your companion. Only through this will you be able to cope with any bad situations that may arise in connection with the task. But if, as a result of my explanations, you decide for the task with foreknowledge, and if you willingly insert yourself into everything, Against all adversities, the success for the execution of your task will be great. Before the covenant is dissolved, you will unite in love with another companion in order to have with her a free, good, loving, and lifelong covenant relationship and a single offspring. But you will also lovingly accept her freely begotten son, as well as one from another mother, in the place of a father. But about this, and also about very many other necessary things that will arise in your life and in the history of the world, as well as in other respects, I will enlighten you at a later time, about which, however, you must keep silent, if, after my explanations, you should decide for your task after an appropriate period of reflection. If you decide to turn to your task, it will not only bring pleasing and great success, but also adversity from malicious people, envious people, liars and blasphemers, and traitors. But there will also be fellow travelers in a covenant immediately around you, as there will also be many outside your inner reach. But it will also be that again and again treachery will be practiced in your narrow covenant out of selfishness or egoism and unsuccessful desire for power, which, however, will not bring any disadvantage to the fulfillment of your task, but for the treacherous fellow travellers who, lying and blaspheming, will put themselves at a great disadvantage. But now listen further. Edouard, for you were born to give much to the human beings of the earth world, so that they may once more receive the great teaching of the prophets brought to them, as has been the case since time immemorial, when our early ancestors came to earth from an earth-foreign world 13,500 years ago as a greater division. With them came one of the prophets, Enoch, as a teacher of these ancestors who had great tasks to fulfill on earth. And this one prophet was followed thousands of years later by another, Enoch, who, however, had the duty to instruct the human beings on earth and to acquaint them with the ancient teaching of the prophets, as well as to intervene with enlightening, helping, truthful, and important words in the destiny of the human beings of the earth world, which they themselves will create in a bad way in ignorance and unreason until the distant future. And over the following millennia, 5 more prophets came at different times who were of the same kind, did and worked as first Enoch. But all of them were disregarded, even persecuted, and tried to be killed, and their teachings and warnings were thrown to the wind, so that the teaching and prophetic words of the prophets faded away. Well, the last 2 prophets, however, were followed by fellow travelers who were learners, and, despite persecutions, took up the teaching of the prophets, but as a result of their lack of understanding or through self-exaltation, falsified and spread it just as much as the scribes, who had to write down what was said to them, but interpreted much according to their own meaning. From this came false teachings and conceits and faith, and from this, in turn, false and confused religions, with a deity invented by human beings of the earth, to whom it was falsely ascribed that he was the creator of the universe, of all celestial bodies and living beings. These 2 new religions, as well as others, and their unreal deities displaced in the course of time many other religious beliefs that had existed since time immemorial, which were connected with many and numerous deities invented by human beings, to whom offerings were made for the purpose of protection against disease, evils, and natural disasters, but also for the sake of good harvests and the benevolence of the deities. These offerings were made as a result of the invented lies of faith, as well as out of the cult mania and the murderous lust of the cult thinkers and cult operators, out of their own pleasure-seeking desire for bloody human murders and human mutilation, whereby, however, these bloody and death-demanding demands for sacrifices were attributed to the respective deities. But now you have come to give again, and also to teach that these monstrosities are nothing but lies and delusions invented by malicious and power-obsessed human beings of the earth, which do not correspond to reality and thus contradict the truth. You will, if you make your correct decision, set this fact right, carry on the teaching of the prophets, and warn the human beings of Earth of what they will continue to do destructively and destructively in the time to come, against all reason and rationality. This they do in the future, as they have done for thousands of years, indulging in the killing, torturing, and discord of their own kind, as well as destroying and ruining much of nature and the planet and their own created works. This is in addition to the fact that they exterminated many plants and all kinds of walking, flying, crawling, and swimming life forms, and will also continue to do so in the future in great and ever more terrible matters. And this will be done in the future in a much worse way than in the past, as a result of the very rapidly increasing mass of mankind, which is to be called overpopulation, and their worldwide, all-destroying and destroying manipulations of nature, the atmosphere, the fauna and flora, and on and in the planet itself. Now, in the time to come, you will call out and spread the warnings for this just as widely on Earth as you did the teaching of the prophets, as the 6 prophets have already announced and taught to the human beings before you on Earth, and also warned them of what they will do in the distant future through their wrong actions and non-observance of the teaching of the prophets. You will now, if you choose to do so, as the prophets of old did before you, be the knower and denunciator of truth for the human beings of this world all your life, and warn them of the coming dangerous and destructive events. And these events will be, as I said, because Earth humans, through their egoism, their greed, their power, their lack of understanding, and their unreasonableness, will disregard the laws of nature and cause immense harm. And this will be so because they do not want to hear your voice and simply let it die away in the wind. In the time to come, through the uncontrolled rampant overpopulation, they will dangerously affect and change the entire nature, the atmosphere and weather conditions, and the entire planet in its function and structure, and thereby cause indomitable, immense natural catastrophes. And in the future they will also destroy and annihilate very much of their own work, as they will also irrevocably consign many species and kinds of fauna and flora to extinction. And in the times to come, they will conjure up planet-wide changes which will hinder and inhibit the possibility of life for human beings and all life forms throughout the Earth, and generally produce negative effects or even take them away completely. Poisons of all kinds are released, as are also poisonous products, such as many kinds of artificial solid and mobile substances, as well as gases and heavy metals, and so on. All these impurities will cause a great deal of harm, poison innumerable human beings, nature, the atmosphere, and vast quantities of fauna and flora, and drive them into disease and death, because all these substances will be released on and into the lands and plants of all kinds, into the waters and seas, and into the atmosphere and the air we breathe. and will be absorbed by all human beings through the respiratory system, the pores of the body, and through food, and will cause innumerable sufferings and finally also death in many cases. You were born and came to make the human beings of the earth understand the truth of these facts, to instruct them and warn them of the aforementioned bad changes, and to lead them into a higher consciousness through your teachings. In this task, you have to work all the time of your life. If you want to decide for it, for which you have to consult yourself at length, judging and thinking it through, and from this come to the decision of the pros or cons. Whether you want to accept and carry out this task, which will be a lifelong and difficult mission, or refuse it, is up to you. And in spite of your young age of 7 years, you are capable of this decision, and also know, as I infallibly know, that in spite of very great difficulties which will come upon you in your life, you will master your task if you decide for it. And in order not to leave you in the dark for your necessary decision with all that is to come, I will now still initiate you into various things of prophetic and predictive manner, which will arrive on earth in the future and bring unpleasant things. These are coming events and things which on the one hand could be changed, but on the other hand will come to pass unchangeably. As early as next year, as a result of the war, atomic bombs will be dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, causing the murder of hundreds of thousands of human beings and the complete destruction of the cities. It will be an irresponsible and criminal act by the USA. However, all this will unfortunately not be the end of all horrors, mass murders, wars, and acts of terrorism, because these will continue for a very long time, even in the new millennium. And also at the present time, horrible events are taking place in the current world war on Earth, as a result of which very many human beings will still suffer terrible deaths, as has been the case since the beginning of the war. And because it will be necessary for you and your further development, and if you are willing to do so, I will take you to different places and let you see several such events and recognize to what horrible deeds many human beings of both sexes of the earth world are capable of degenerating. The human beings of all nations must finally become knowledgeable and courageous in order to remove from office all those who are obsessed with power in their authorities, so as not to allow them to continue. Unfortunately, the peoples of every country usually put the wrong people in government, namely power-obsessed people who first make great promises, but when they are in power, they break them and act against the good of the peoples. You will get to know such power-obsessed people through my help and through my successors, as well as descendants, but you will have to keep quiet about this for a long time. Often many of these power-obsessed people force their peoples into wars and terror, and with deceit and lies. They put the human beings under their spell, whereby the superiors succeed in making the peoples in bondage to them, who become blind and misjudge the real truth. This, however, will have evil consequences in the time to come, because those in power in many countries worldwide will snatch away the rights of the peoples and rule over them in a detrimental, dictatorial manner. And it will be that the human beings of the earth will soon fall more and more into revolts, wars, and terror, as well as into xenophobia and racial hatred. And in this respect, everything will become uncontrollable worldwide. The time for this will already begin when the World War ends next year. For already now, monstrous delusions are smouldering like smouldering fire in delusional human beings, who are full of racist hatred against foreigners and other peoples. Already in the next few years, everything will erupt into open fire and burn far into the future of the third millennium. For the end of the war next year will not bring peace, but the beginning of further wars around the world, as well as a new and extensive dictatorship in Europe, in which countries will recklessly ally themselves. There is still time to prevent these and many other coming and worldwide death and destruction bringing monstrosities, as they have been prophesied for the future of the earth and mankind, as well as for nature, weather conditions, climate, and for fauna and flora since time immemorial. Everything can still be changed for the better if the peoples and all those responsible in the governments and sciences make every effort to stop all the catastrophes and evils that already exist and are in progress, as well as new ones that are on the horizon, and to bring about a positive change. If this is not done, then tremendous horrors will befall the humanity of the earth, bringing misery, suffering, death, and destruction, with the world power USA in the forefront in every respect, bringing turmoil, death, destruction, and annihilation to many countries. But it will not only be destruction and annihilation caused by Earth humans, for the future of Earth will be marked by millions of deaths through wars, terror, and crime, as well as by hundreds of thousands of deaths as a result of natural disasters and the direct and indirect consequences of the inexorably growing overpopulation. And great misery of innumerable deaths will also be expressed in the coming time through hunger, diseases, epidemics, and increasingly frequent family murders, mass murders in schools, offices, sects, and at events, as well as through lust, serial, sexual, and prostitution murders, etc., also through the fault of human beings and their manipulations of nature, the planet, the seas and waters and the atmosphere. All the laws of nature will be thrown into turmoil, causing catastrophes as in primeval times. As a result of the destruction of nature, ever more violent storms will bring much suffering, misery, death, and destruction, whereby the natural disasters will increase unstoppably and take on ever worse and uncontrollable forms. Primeval storms with hailstorms, ice and snowstorms, and ever more violent torrential rain will bring problems worldwide that can no longer be managed, because human beings will no longer be able to do anything to counteract them, but on the contrary will do everything to promote the entire disaster even further, namely by pushing the overpopulation even further without reason or responsibility, and already after the first decade of the third millennium, it will amount to more than 8 billion human beings. And the inexorably increasing mass of overpopulation, which will be concentrated mainly in cities, will dangerously affect the entire tectonics of the planet by the weight of millions of human beings and their living and working structures. This, however, in addition to the many volcanic activities, most of which cause little or no damage, will also lead to increased volcanic eruptions and will claim more than 3,000 human lives as early as 1951, when the Lamington volcano in New Guinea erupts. In each decade of the coming period, the Earth will experience not only a large number of largely harmless volcanic activities, but also severe volcanic catastrophes. I will list a few, such as the 1963 64th eruption of the volcano Agung in Bali, which will cause over 2,000 deaths, as will also a volcanic eruption in Zaire in 1977. These will be followed in 1980 in the USA by the volcano Mount St. Helens, with almost 70 deaths and a huge and all-destroying mud flow of ash and water. And then in 1985 in Colombia by an eruption of the volcano Nevado del Ruiz, which will claim the lives of around 32,000 human beings. In 1991, the Amero volcano in the Philippines will claim more than 1,000 lives. What will happen with severe volcanic eruptions will also extend to severe earthquakes well into the third millennium. Earthquakes in Morocco in 1960 will cause about 13,000 deaths, in Persia in 1968 about 7,000, in 1972 about 11,000, in Guatemala in 1976 about 24,000, and in China in 1976 even 870,000 human beings. And this will not be the end, because it will also continue and increase in the third millennium. The growing mass of overpopulation and its weight, as well as the constantly increasing mass of innumerable living creatures and their weight, which are bred as food for mankind, create gigantic forces on the Earth's plates, causing a series of different movements and thus dangerous earthquakes and seaquakes, which triggers tectonic shifts. So all this will not remain without consequences, because the greater the overpopulation becomes, the more it will be forced to carry out ever new and more devastating manipulations in nature, in and on the planet itself, as well as in the fauna and flora, whereby everything will continue to be destroyed and annihilated to an ever worse degree. More and more life forms of fauna and flora are also being wiped out by toxins of all kinds, waste products, construction, and exploitation of the earth, just as aquatic life forms are dying out and becoming extinct through the poisoning of the seas, rivers, lakes, and all kinds of other bodies of water. This, while on the other hand, as a result of the demand for fish meat, the seas, lakes, and rivers are being fished dry by overfishing. The Earth's ozone layer will also be very dangerously damaged by various exhaust gases and vapors, dangerously damaging fauna and flora, just as solar radiation will bring skin cancer and other diseases to human beings, causing many deaths, which will begin as early as the 1950s and increase rapidly. Enormous primordial storms and floods all over the world, as well as mountain descents and from year to year changing seasons as a result of the already started and ongoing climate destruction and its increasing natural catastrophes, will be the order of the day. And also for this the blame lies with overpopulation and its irresponsible criminal manipulations of nature, the atmosphere, the planet, and the fauna and flora. Also, conflagrations and hardly containable colossal forest fires of immeasurable proportions will destroy and irrevocably destroy much of the fauna and flora around the world. In the process, the atmosphere will also be saturated with soot particles and thus with aerosols, as will also be the case in the Orient as a result of huge oil well fires when the oil wells in Iraq are set on fire as a result of acts of war. The warmongering USA and its urge for world domination will be responsible for this, through whose army and the irresponsibility and power madness of two American presidents, who will be father and son, the Orient will be involved twice in acts of war, and a great deal will be destroyed. From this, a very long and far into the third millennium, lasting discord will arise among various sects of Islam, and sectarian murder and destruction will be unleashed, which could be avoided by the might of the dictator, if not for the guilt of the American military court-martial to hang the dictator of the defeated country. And out of these two Oriental wars, which will be caused by the USA without being attacked or endangered, two vicious, great, and worldwide terrorist organizations will be formed, which will be religious and sectarian in appearance, but will be murder organizations of unprecedented proportions on Earth, claiming thousands of murder victims. Also, in 4 years, that is to say, in 1948, a state of Israel will be founded, which will trigger Israeli-Arab conflicts and also lead to severe and numerous Israeli-Palestinian armed conflicts, with the conflicts continuing well into the third millennium. And long-standing acts of war will also take place in the Far East as well as in the Near East, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives and also involving the USA, but what will continue to happen through the manipulations of Earth humans will be consequences that will be tremendously more diverse, destructive, and devastating than all that has so far hardly been perceived by the inhabitants of Earth. The already existing overpopulation of more than 2 billion people has already caused much irreparable damage to the planet and to the fauna and flora, from which great changes will also result in the atmosphere and the climate. And further and even more diverse events of a destructive and devastating nature will appear from the irresponsible machinations of the further increasing Earth humans. So it also follows that the alluvial forests, alluvial plains, fields, woods, and meadows will be more and more destroyed and built up, as well as streams straightened, diverted, altered, and partly built underground in order to be able to build factories, airports, roads, and workshops, as well as in order to create the necessary space for housing for the still and ever more rapidly increasing overpopulation. In the coming time, and especially towards the end of the 20th century and after the beginning of the third millennium, this will lead to the enormous masses of water from the ever-increasing rain floods finding their way into the houses of human beings, because they can no longer escape in uninhabited nature and can no longer drain away in natural waterways. In the coming time, landslides of various kinds will also cause great havoc in many countries of the earth and claim many human lives, just as glaciers will melt around the world, but also the poles, and cause the seas to rise, while avalanches will cause great damage and also claim many human lives. Earthquakes, seaquakes, and the resulting seaquake floods will also increase and cause great destruction on the land, and also bring death to hundreds of thousands of human beings. The storms will also increase in strength and number, and become more and more violent and destructive. And overpopulation will also be to blame for this, for it will, by its manipulations of nature in general, produce an immense amount of wrong, dangerous, and bad things in order to be able to obtain all the things necessary for its preservation and for the further uncontrolled increase of its progeny, and in turn for its preservation. This will cause more and more natural disasters and extinctions of fauna and flora and destruction of nature and of the planet itself, all of which has already begun in earlier times, but will begin to have a very detrimental effect on the world in only a decade from today. The enormous masses and weights of the ever-expanding cities and villages and the exploitation of the Earth's resources are damaging the internal structures and balance and tectonics of the planet, which will inevitably lead to internal shifts and faults and cause increased earthquakes and seaquakes, with the death toll eventually running into the hundreds of thousands and millions. And these quakes will also have an influence on the entire earthly volcanism. Consequently, the volcanoes worldwide will also bring disaster in many cases. But this is not enough, because due to the constantly growing overpopulation, which will already have grown to well over 8 billion in 70 years, many enormous and unsolvable problems will arise. Famines will increase, as will the demand for energy, which will be counteracted by dangerous radioactive nuclear power plants that will pollute the landscape, water, fauna and flora, as well as the atmosphere, and which will always remain susceptible to damage, even causing deadly catastrophes in the Ukraine in 1986 and in Japan in 2011, and claiming many thousands of lives. Old diseases that were thought to have been eradicated will also reappear, as will several new worldwide epidemics that will claim millions of human lives. There will also be mass tourism around the world, which will cause much suffering and damage, because dangerous diseases and epidemics will spread worldwide and claim many human lives. But also insects, plants and animals, etc., of various genera and species will be carried around the world, displacing and wiping out native species in other countries, causing irreparable extinctions and changes in fauna and flora. And once the new dictatorship has arisen in Europe, which will encompass many countries, then uprisings will arise in Arabia and also in the other countries against their dictatorial rulers, whereby, however, only new dictatorships will emerge from them, as will, in some cases, long-lasting civil wars which will claim hundreds of thousands of human lives. Then, after the beginning of the third millennium, also in the New Germany, which will be quickly rebuilt after the end of the World War, which will last until next year, an irresponsible power obsessive will emerge, to whom all the stupid, power-hungry people of the new multi-ethnic dictatorship will pay homage. And they will do this without knowing that out of hidden hatred she harbors vicious intrigues against Germany and wants to destroy it politically and economically. And they will all let her do so, because in their power-mongering, selfishness and stupidity, they will not notice what the woman wants, and how she is predisposed and will also succeed in causing a mass exodus of human beings from Africa, Asia and the Orient to Europe. This will then be used by criminal gangs to bring human beings to Europe, especially from African, Arab and Asian countries, in exchange for large sums of money, by surreptitious means or by normal, but long, circuitous, obstacle-ridden and dangerous routes, whereby many of the real and false refugees will die, especially many thousands from Africa, who want to reach the south of Europe via the Mediterranean in dilapidated ships and boats. The consequences of these millions of real and false refugees in need of help, caused by the unscrupulous ruler, will be that a very large number of bogus refugees will also arrive in Europe, who only hope for a good life in the new multi-country dictatorship or want to commit criminal acts. So there will also be a large number of criminals and murderers among the refugees, who will then commit criminal and felonious acts, while terrorists, who will also find unhindered entry into Europe with the refugee flows, will be waiting to spread death, disaster, ruin, and destruction. In this way, the whole of Europe will be flooded with refugee flows, from which an enormous asylum seeker problem will also arise. Forecasts have also shown that in the near future there will be a drug addiction among young people and adults all over Europe and on the American continent, which will cause many deaths and which will last far into the third millennium. From the mid-1980s onwards, the economic boom will collapse worldwide, bringing enormous and unprecedented unemployment and much misery and hardship, as well as a cold and indifferent lack of relationships among human beings. However, this will also cause crime and terrorism to rise sharply, with criminal and felonious gangs from poor countries also spreading into the industrialized countries in Europe, committing burglaries, fraud and theft, and not even shying away from murder. The banks will ruin themselves through greed and ignorance, just as many countries will become massively indebted, because the governments will squander the financial resources they collect from their people as taxes and will increase these taxes by all kinds of finesse and also impose taxes on more and more things, foodstuffs and goods. A political and also religious as well as racist hatred, terrorist extremism, and a neo-Nazi system, etc., will build up around the world next year after the end of the World War, will spread worldwide and will cause a lot of mischief and murders. Prostitution will also take on degenerate forms in the coming years and will become respectable and public worldwide, and will also be taxed and protected by the authorities, just as public prostitution and prostitution advertising will be permitted. Even children will not be spared from prostitution, and in the coming times will be more and more abused, sold, or murdered by their own parents or by foreign child molesters. In just one decade, devices will be on the market which will be called television sets, and in 2 to 3 decades will be as much a part of everyday life in every family as computer technology will be from the 1980s onwards. These technologies, such as television and computers, will be among the most important information media in the future, as will also small portable communication devices, which will be used en masse by adults, children, and young people, especially from the beginning of the third millennium, and through which very many human beings will become addicted and forfeit all interpersonal relationships. Similarly, computer addiction will occur, as well as addiction to computer games and other electronic games, which will afflict adults, young people, and children, affecting and destroying family relationships and friendships to the point of disintegration. The development of digital technologies, as they will be called in the future, has been worked on diligently for a long time in America, Germany, Japan, and in the Soviet Union, so that from the 1980s onwards, this technology emerges in many forms and then spreads very quickly to the world's population, which then causes many great problems. And this will be both in a health-damaging way, as everything will also spread to crime, criminality, and to the worldwide political, religious, and sectarian terrorism, which will already begin in the next decades and spread very quickly in a brutal and murderous way. The human beings of the earth will become impoverished in their interpersonal relationships and cold, indifferent, uncompassionate, and selfish in their thoughts and feelings as a result of these techniques. But they will also become dumbed down and completely alienated from the environment, their fellow human beings, and reality. Everything will lead to thinking and acting only for personal purposes, and real true love will become a rarity. Marriage alliances will only be entered into in order to indulge in a certain status, which will only be traded in prestige and money, resulting in very many alliances not lasting long, families being destroyed, and offspring not being brought up, abused, murdered, or sexually abused. As a result, many become antisocial and neglectful, as many of them, as well as adult human beings, begin to lead a life that is often only drug-oriented from the late 1950s onwards. From the end of the 1970s onwards, the drug problem will become more and more prevalent, as will the addiction to constant pleasure, which will be exacerbated by the emergence of destructive and disharmonious sounds, which will be mistaken for music, but which will badly affect the thoughts, feelings, and psyche and cause diseases to decay. Religious sectarianism will also become more and more prevalent and will cause many deaths. And I will mention in particular a mass suicide of a sect in Guyana in 1978 with more than 900 sect members. And because such a sect will also occur in Switzerland, I will also mention this event, which will occur in 1994 with 38 murders and 15 suicides committed by sect members. This event will be attributed to the fact that supposedly the cult members will return to their original home on another planet, because the Earth will be destroyed by the human beings and life on it will become impossible. Therefore, it will be necessary to return to the realm of the spirit and thus to Sirius. In reality, a systematic and cruel murder of the cult members will take place for the most part. In Switzerland and Canada, men, women, and children of the cult are drugged and poisoned, also shot or stabbed to death, while others who resist the murder are beaten up and beaten to death. The history of this cult will be very absurd, and there will also be an inner dependency and sexual abuse of the members by the cult leadership, as is, and will also be the case with many other old and emerging cults, especially from 1950 onwards, in religious, sectarian, and esoteric circles, as well as through stupid claims by astrologers. False clairvoyants and confused and conspiring interpreters of old traditions, a worldwide millennium changes delusion will be built up through which many suicides and murders will occur. But from 1950 onwards, many deceivers will also dare to identify themselves as supposedly chosen by God in order to exploit their believers financially and sexually and to make them their slaves. Other irresponsible people all over the earth will also take advantage of the fact that observations of unexplained flying objects become known in order to claim that they are flying apparatuses from other worlds, which are then called UFOs, and with whose beings they have had personal contact or have important connections. Some among these irresponsible ones will claim, against the truth, that they are God-sent and would receive divine messages to save Earth's humanity or to lift it into the kingdom of God. From these claims and lies will emerge fraudulent so-called UFO sects, whose founders will gather around them fellow believers who will lie to them, deceive them, exploit them financially, or even abuse them in many ways, especially women and children, in a sexual way, as has also been the case since time immemorial with religious sects, and especially also with so-called clergy of the Catholic Church and with institutional educators, and will continue to be so. Among others, such sects and their followers will be adversaries against you, who will insult you and want to harm you and your mission, as will also be the case with theologians, journalists and the like, who will be religiously or opinionatedly and arrogantly obsessed. And the time will also come when you accept your task and are committed to it, that the adversaries of all kinds will dispute your task by lies, deceit, and blasphemy, and spread untruths about you, because they would allegedly cultivate connections with my descendants, who will come to you after my departure and continue the connection with you. Of course, all this will only be when you turn to your task, which is for you alone to decide. But you must know that you will then remain in contact with human beings of my kind until the end of your days. And this will be so, as also that deceivers will appear who will claim that they are descendants of my descendants and messengers from the Plejaren. And this will also be a reason why you, on our behalf, as well as those who follow me, will name the Pleiades, known to the human beings as our star system of origin, and will use this false designation until the deceivers and liars, after a long time, unintentionally reveal their reprehensible actions through their lies. So for the first few years, you will not speak correctly of Plejaren, but of the Pleiadians known on Earth, and only then will you give the correct designation when the time will have come to expose the deceivers. But you shall keep silent about this until that time, when my descendants and other descendants ask you to give the correct name of their origin, which must be concealed for a long time, because the selfish deceivers will lie for a long time and claim to be connected with alleged beings from the Pleiades of the Pleiades system that do not bear life, with which they will associate you and my descendants, etc., in a lying and blasphemous way. Therefore, insofar as you will decide for your task, which I will explain to you later in further and much more detail, my descendants, as well as others who follow me, and also you, will first designate the Pleiades stars as my and my descendants, etc., star system of origin. I, like others who follow me, and you too, will first call the Pleiades my star system and that of my descendants, etc., and then correctly call our star system Plejaren when the deceivers and blasphemers have made themselves openly recognizable and involuntarily known as liars. But it will also be that conspiracies will be created against you, to which, however, you shall pay no attention, as also not to the many hostilities of numerous adversaries, some of whom will then be devout followers of a sect. But it will also be several times that attempts will be made to kill you. And when I speak again of the fact that a millennium change delusion will soon be prepared, it is also to be said that many conspirators will appear who will spread fear and terror with nonsensical assertions and suppositions, and will claim that at the millennium change the earth will pass away, which, however, will not be the case, just as the lie will not become truth that chosen human beings of the earth will be saved by angels or human beings from foreign worlds. All these are also outgrowths and consequences of the growing overpopulation, which will produce more and more irresponsible people who will attack their believers with lies and deceit, and who will be able to exploit them through fear and terror. So it will be in the future that basically the real origin of all coming evils in the future will be the manifold manipulations arising from overpopulation, because the bigger, more extensive and manifold it becomes, the more enormous will be the problems arising from it. And if the earth world is ruined, then humanity is the guilty author of the earth itself For by creating the real cause of it, which will lie in the ever-increasing number of overpopulation, a planet-wide destruction of nature will take place. It will therefore not be a god of any religion or sect imagined by human beings, who will create the coming tremendous catastrophes, excesses, problems, and all calamities in order to punish human beings as false prophets. Believers and representatives of religions and sects have claimed through lies since time immemorial. For, in truth, it will all be the fault of Earth humans who will bring about the entire calamity through the overflowing overpopulation. But also in the time to come and far into the future, brazen, like-minded liars and confused believers will foolishly claim that all events are punishing works of God, although only overpopulation and thus the mass of Earth humans will be the author of all horrors. For the individual human being will continue to delude himself that he is the highest and most powerful being in the universe, and will continue unabated in his old-fashioned manner. Thus, through the guilt of overpopulation and through the indifference, the megalomania, the unreasonableness and self-importance of Earth's humanity, the power of nature is being challenged, which for some time now has begun to rise up and defend itself against the degenerating manipulations of the already rapidly growing overpopulation, and will continue to defend itself into the distant future in ever more violent ways. This fact is not perceived by those human beings who are scientifically educated, but blind to the truth of what is happening in nature. The forces of nature on Earth will soon bring ever worse effects and become rampant, because the entire planet will be affected by overpopulating Earth humans and their manipulations, which will disturb and destroy the entire natural course of the elements and of life in such a way, and will continue to do so that in the third millennium the worst fears will inexorably come true. I have to explain all this to you. These prophetic and also predictive words, which are true and will come true if there is no return to reason and if the overpopulation and its manipulations of nature, the planet, the atmosphere, and fauna and flora are not radically stopped and brought to an end. Now, summarize everything, all my explanations and words that you have heard from me. Have the courage to consider what I have said and to act upon it correctly, and to make your decision whether to accept or reject the task that has been explained to you. There is enough time for you should not be pressed and only give me your answer when I will be here again in 3 days and ask for your decision. Consider the prophetic statements as well as the predictions, which you are well able to distinguish and judge according to your understanding and reason.
All that you have said and explained I have understood very well, and during your explanations I have also thought about it very carefully and thoroughly, as well as about all that you have taught me telepathically for a long time. That's why I think, and I also have a good feeling about this, that I do not need to think any further, because my decision is already clear. My answer is that I will make an effort and carry the task.
That, I realize, is actually meant seriously, amazingly, because from your voice sounds clarity, courage, and the will for really understanding everything, as well as for doing what you say. Amazing, but I was not mistaken in you, for you confirm with your decisions exactly what I have noticed and recognized again and again since your birth until today, namely that you are already grown up at your young age, if I take into account your consciousness, your knowledge, your intellect, and your reason. So listen to what else I have to say, namely that from now on, you will learn a great deal from me and acquire and need a great deal of knowledge in various things in order to act in the sense of your task to lead the human beings off the earth to the better in the sense of a change. Make everything of your task public for all human beings of the earth through teachings in all forms possible to you by the traditional teaching of the prophets. Endeavor to bring about a change and transformation in the human beings of the earth in a positive sense, making no distinction between the human beings, neither between female, male, children, youths, and adults, nor with regard to skin color, race, and social and professional status. Also, every religious and sectarian belief of human beings should and must never be a reason for you to make a distinction between believing, non-believing, or non-believing human beings. But you must know that everything will be very difficult because you are not to proselytize and not to convince, but only to bring the teaching and the truth by instructing, teaching, and fulfilling your duty from the background. Always be careful to be only instructing and teaching to every human being, but never convincing, for by one conviction, the thoughts and personal opinion of the other human being will be suppressed, pushed away, and destroyed and overlaid by other thoughts and another opinion. But this must never be, for every human being must decide for himself his thoughts, feelings, and for his opinion, attitude, action, and behavior in every respect by his own free will. And every human being must do this in himself alone, which is why he must only be instructed and taught to think about it himself and to recognize from it the correctness and reality. And if this is done, then the human being will also find truth and reality, which can always and in every case only be contained in reality. And if reality and truth are recognized, then certainty is formed from them, and with it the knowledge that everything is irrevocably and unalterably in agreement with each other. Always be humble, good and helpful, and compassionate, honest and undaunted in your teachings and also in your life, actions and behavior, in all your dealings and interactions with nature, human beings and all fauna and flora, as you have been since birth. Do not come to the fore so that human beings do not revere you, but only honor and appreciate you. Never ask for thanks and rewards for what you teach and instruct or for anything else you do. In this way, you can assist and help the human beings, even if at first there will only be a few, because they must find their own way to you and learn and follow the teaching without being influenced. Always bear in mind and be certain that a human being can never be changed by another human being, neither in his way of thinking, his interests, his intellect, his reason, nor his nature, actions, and behavior. Basically, every human being can only do this for himself by finding himself and attentively teaching himself and changing how, what, and who he wants to be. Every human being thus has the possibility and might, on his own responsibility, to protect himself from everything that brings him harm through a wrong way of thinking, through ignorance and unreason, indifference and wrong actions and behavior. If he hesitates and does not act correctly, then he fails to take responsibility himself for everything and to make himself a true human being.
What you say, Svath, I shall always remember.
That you will, there is no doubt in my mind, but now I have spoken at length, and I wanted to...
Thanks for your efforts. As I listened to the whole thing, memories came to me. But if you are not in a hurry for time, I have something to ask again.
Of course.
You spoke recently in a private conversation about the fact that the Earth's atmosphere is becoming toxically polluted due to mass overpopulation and its machinations with the mass breeding of cattle, pigs, and other animals as well as poultry, and that the air for all life forms to breathe is also becoming more and more negatively polluted, and the oxygen has already become thinner and worse. Can you also say something openly about that, please?
What you say is correct. Air pollution is caused by many kinds of toxins that get into the atmosphere, but especially very much by the flatulence of billions of human beings as well as by the mass breeding of cattle, pigs, other animals, and poultry of many kinds, which emit their winds and affect the air we breathe and damage its quality. Flatulence primarily affects the respiratory tract of human beings, that is to say, the mucous membranes of the nose, larynx, and throat. But it also affects the trachea, lungs, and conjunctiva of the eyes. Acute irritations of the upper respiratory tract as well as conjunctival irritations are mostly caused by volatile toxic substances as well as allergens, whereby dry air, especially indoors, favors the development of these complaints.
One moment, please. Flatulence. You should explain this term, because I think that many human beings are not familiar with it, and they also do not know that this Latin word refers to the downdraft of human beings or to the wind of the body, as was said in the past, although this term is no longer common today, because the way of speaking has changed, unfortunately often quite uncouthly, as it is also with regard to the downdraft. I'm sure it would also be interesting if you would explain something about that.
What you say is of course correct because the term flatulence refers to the wind or flatulence in all life forms. The term refers to the increased development of gases in the stomach and intestines of all life forms. These gases include carbon dioxide, methane, hydrogen sulfide, and other fermentation gases which are actually putrefactive gases. These then escape rectally from the body or through the rectum. If these intestinal gases accumulate, painful abdominal cramps can occur. The digestive process can take up to 40 hours, during which intestinal gases are produced, but most of them diffuse into the bloodstream and are exhaled through the lungs, causing burping. Normally, flatulence is an excess of gas of about 0.5 to 1.5 liters per day, although this can increase greatly, especially due to gas-forming foods, such as chicken eggs, legumes, crisp bread, garlic, cabbage, watermelon, and onions, etc., as well as due to intolerance of foods or digestive disorders, which can also cause diarrhea or diarrhea. A significant increase in gas production can also be caused by gas-forming foods, for example, because they contain the sugar molecules rhamnose, raffinose, and stachyose. These cannot be utilized in the small intestine, but only in the large intestine, where they are decomposed by the bacteria of the intestinal flora. Rhamnose and stachyose are also found in higher concentrations in the foods chicken eggs, cabbage, crisp bread, celery, Jerusalem artichokes, watermelons, and onions. The constituents of downdrafts are carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur compounds, nitrogen, and hydrogen, which not infrequently lead to very unpleasant odors and even a very foul-smelling stench. Sulfur compounds such as methane thiol, hydrogen sulfide, and dimethyl sulfide are primarily the odor-forming components. The majority of intestinal gases are created during digestion by bacteria, which produce methane, sulfur compounds, and hydrogen, and which are the reason for the easy flammability of the waste gas. Carbon dioxide is produced when food reacts with stomach hydrochloric acid. The noises that are often caused by the escape of downwash or gases from the rectum are caused by the downwash pressure causing a vibration at the anal opening, whereby the downwash noise varies according to the tension of the sphincter muscle and the speed and volume of the downwash expelled. So far, what has been explained should suffice.
I think so too. Thanks for your explanation. Orgone, are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Can you tell me about it and expand my knowledge?
Yes, briefly I can go into it, but really only briefly. It is a discovery made in 1939 attributed to one Wilhelm Reich, which was based on the fact that a bion culture obtained from sea sand by annealing and swelling excited itself in such a way that a reaction was produced by influencing the body at the electroscope. He then judged the whole thing to be solidified solar energy and called it orgone. He then found through his research that the sun was emitting an energy that could charge insulators of organic matter that could put the human organism into a vegetative, undisturbed state after good breathing.
Is that all there is to it?
Yes, but there is relevant literature about it if you are interested.
I will have to think about that, because I only asked you about it because I had a lovely and remarkable visitor the other day, and the conversation was about orgone and Dr. Wilhelm Reich. The question was also raised whether orgone energy could also be connected with the cosmic electromagnetic life energy. But if I think about the matter more carefully, this cannot be, because this life energy is purely of a spirit energy nature, whereas orgone as solidified solar energy corresponds to a material energy.
Which is absolutely correct, because orgone is a radiant energy from the sun that solidifies in matter and can also be used in a life-enhancing way, which was correctly identified by Reich.
But then I still have the question about this. This orgone energy, if that is just as you say, should then be present in the earth and in the atmosphere, as well as in human beings, in all living organisms, and thus also in all fauna and flora, in quartz and rock, etc. Or...
This is also correct, as I said. With the appropriate and correct apparatus, orgone can be detected visually, thermally, and electroscopically.
which, as usual, will probably meet with resistance from our narrow-minded earthly scientists until one day they are taught better by some circumstances, in order to then make a big fuss and present themselves as heroes and luminaries, which they are not, but claim to have discovered everything themselves.
Which I am sure you will be right about, though the whole thing could go on for a long time.
I can imagine. During our last private conversation, we talked about various substances that cause all kinds of health disorders in human beings. If it is possible, time-wise for you, I mean, could you repeat what you said so that it is also included in an open discussion report? The conversation has been about asbestos, formaldehyde, biocides, CO2, particulate matter, odors, allergens, and carbon monoxide.
Naturally, for that it is good if you make a list. Substance, disorder, disease. Asbestosis, peritoneal and rib cancer, formaldehyde headaches, carcinogenic, irritation of the respiratory tract and eyes, malaise biocides, CPCP, pyrethroids, headaches, nervous system disorders, liver cancer, nausea CO2, carbon dioxide pollution indicator for the air fine dust respiratory damage, impaired lung function, heart and circulatory problems, death odors, disturbances of well-being, stress allergens conjunctivitis, allergic asthma, mucous membrane inflammation, rhinitis, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, internal asphyxiation, heart disorders, headaches, visual disorders, dizziness, central nervous system disorders.
Thanks.
Then I also have the following privately.